A mangrove is a woody tree or shrub that lives along sheltered coastlines, within the tropic or subtropic latitudes. In fact, the various species of mangroves aren't necessarily closely related to one another, but they do share the unique capability of growing within reach of the tides in salty soil. Some mangrove species live so close to the shoreline that they are flooded with salt water every day, as the tide comes in and submerges their roots. All mangroves have evolved special adaptations that enable them to live in salty, oxygen-poor soil. Mangroves grow in sheltered tropical and subtropical coastal areas across the globe. Geographical limits are highly variable depending upon the area of the world and local climates. The salty soils of the intertidal pose an inhospitable barrier for most woody plants, but the mangrove is uniquely adapted for these conditions. These adaptations are so successful that some mangroves are able to grow in soils that reach salinities up to 75 parts per thousand, about 2 times the salinity of ocean water. However, most mangroves do better in ranges between 3 and 27 parts per thousand. The soil where mangroves are rooted poses a second challenge for plants as it is severely lacking in oxygen. Even though plants use photosynthesis to produce energy, they must do cellular respiration to power their cells like animals, by consuming oxygen. Most plants can easily take oxygen from gases trapped within the surrounding soil, but for mangrove roots, this is not an option and they need access to air. Not only are mangrove roots underground, they are also flooded with water up to 2 times a day. This unique environment allowed for the evolution of a variety of special structures that help the underground roots gain access to air, even when submerged by the tide. While most terrestrial plants use what's called a taproot to burrow deep into the ground for support, several mangrove species rely on sprawling cable roots that stay within a few centimeters of the soil's surface for stability and access to oxygen. Life by the ocean has its perks for mangroves. Proximity to the waves and tides helps with reproduction. For most plants, the seeds remain dormant until after they are dispersed to a favorable environment. Not mangroves. Mangrove offspring begin to grow while still attached to their parent. This type of plant reproduction is called vivipary. After mangrove flowers are pollinated, the plants produce seeds that immediately begin to germinate into seedlings. The little seedlings, called propagules, then fall off the tree and can be swept away by the ocean current. Depending upon the species, propagules will float for a number of days before becoming waterlogged and sinking to the muddy bottom, where they lodge in the soil. Mangrove trees can be distantly related and are grouped together for their shared characteristics rather than true genetic ties. Some individuals will grow to be no more than stunted shrubs while others will grow to be up to 40 meters tall. Mangroves are among the most productive and biologically complex ecosystems on Earth. They cover roughly 138,000 and 200,000 square kilometers globally, acting as a bridge connecting the land and sea. Though most will be less than a couple of miles thick along the coastline, in some areas of the world they are massive aquatic forests. Mangrove forests are important feeding grounds for thousands of species and support a diverse food web. Some organisms will eat the leaves directly, especially crabs and insects, while other decomposers wait for the mangrove leaves to fall to the ground and consume the decaying material. Microbes and fungi among the mangrove roots use the decaying material as fuel, and in return, they recycle nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and iron for the mangroves. Other organisms rely on the structures created by the branching trees and their tangle of roots. Monkeys, birds, insects, and other plants all live in mangrove branches. Part of a mangrove forest's value comes from its ability to modify and support the surrounding environment. The complicated root systems absorb the impact of waves, which allows for the buildup of sand, dirt, and silt particles. The roots even hold onto those sediments, which leads to better water quality and a reduction in erosion. Mangroves further improve water quality by absorbing nutrients from runoff that might otherwise cause harmful algal blooms offshore. Both coral reefs and seagrass beds rely on the water purifying ability of nearby mangrove forests to keep the water clear and healthy. Mangrove forests are excellent at absorbing and storing carbon from the atmosphere. As the trees grow, they take the carbon from carbon dioxide and use it as the building blocks for their leaves, roots, and branches. Once the leaves and older trees die, they fall to the seafloor and take the stored carbon with them to be buried in the soil. This buried carbon is known as blue carbon, because it is stored underwater in coastal ecosystems like mangrove forests, seagrass beds, and salt marshes. Mangroves make up less than 2% of marine environments but account for 10 to 15% of carbon burial. Mangrove forests save lives. When cyclonic storms like typhoons and hurricanes make landfall, they create a strong storm surge that can cause serious flooding. Mangroves naturally absorb influxes of water on a daily basis and are able to cope with the extra flooding during a storm. But the recent mangrove deforestation to make way for development and shrimp farms has created hazardous conditions for people living close to shore. The damage caused by the 2004 tsunami spurred impacted countries to rethink mangrove importance, and many restoration projects are working to rebuild lost forests. Mangroves have a global estimated worth of $1,648 billion. The wood is frequently used to build stilt houses, furniture, fences, bridges, fishing poles and traps, canoes, rafts, and boats. Charcoal from mangroves is highly prized in Japan. Products from mangroves are also used in soaps, cosmetics, perfumes, and insecticides. Medicinal properties of mangroves include relieving pain, decreasing inflammation, treating diabetes, acting as an anti-tumor drug, ridding the body of parasites, as an antiseptic, and many, many more. Rich in tannins, compounds that are notable for their influence on the taste of red wine, mangrove bark is used in the tanning of animal skins to make leather. Treating animal hides with tannin alters the hide's protein structure so it becomes soft, pliable, and resistant to decomposition. People who live in mangrove forests often rely on fishing to make a living. A 2006 study found the Mantang mangrove forest in West Malaysia supports fisheries worth $100 million per year. And in the Gulf of California and Mexico, mangroves provide habitat for about 32% of the local fishery landings, an equivalent of $15,000 per acre.